If you've ever driven through the back roads of Appalachia, you know this. The dark out here doesn't just fall, it settles. The stories people whisper? They're not just tales, they're warnings carried down. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It always gives me chills thinking about all of us, in different places, staring into the same shadows together. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It helps more people stumble into these woods, even if they might regret it. Let's begin. My name's Daniel Holt. I'm 35, work as a county land surveyor, and last year I learned there are places in the Appalachian Mountains that shouldn't be mapped. Places you don't put on paper, no matter how accurate you think you're being. The story starts with a deed transfer. My aunt passed away in early spring, leaving me a small, rotting hunting cabin on a steep stretch of ridge known locally as Deadwater Hollow. It's tucked deep in the Allegheny Highlands, just north of the Green Bank Observatory. I didn't grow up there. My family stopped visiting when I was a kid, after some falling out between my dad and Aunt Ruth. I barely remembered the place, just an image of a dark pond behind the cabin, perfectly still even when the wind was howling in the trees. I only went because I needed a break from town. My apartment lease was ending, work was slow, and part of me thought maybe fixing up the cabin could turn it into a decent weekend rental. I told myself it would be a working trip, take measurements, note repairs, mark the property lines for the tax records. That was my first mistake, thinking about boundaries in a place that never cared about them. It took nearly 4 hours to get there, most of it on roads so narrow I had to pull into the ditch whenever a logging truck barreled past. Eventually, the pavement gave up and the gravel turned to little more than a dirt track. The driveway was a winding half-mile path, washed out in spots, ending at a clearing barely large enough to turn the truck around. The cabin sat under a canopy of black oak and hemlock. The boards were grayed with age, and one corner sagged like the earth was trying to swallow it. Still, the roof was intact, and the front porch steps didn't collapse when I tested them, so it could have been worse. Inside smelled like damp paper and rusted metal. The furniture was covered in sheets. The kitchen sink had a pump handle but no running water. In the corner of the main room was a wood stove with an iron kettle still sitting on top, as if someone had walked out in the middle of boiling tea. But the strangest thing was the silence. Not peaceful silence. This was the kind that makes your ears strain for anything. A bird call, a branch snapping, and find nothing. That first evening, I walked around the property with my clipboard. Behind the cabin, the ground sloped toward a small pond choked with dark green algae. I remembered it from childhood, though in my memory it had been larger. The air was cooler near the water, and the trees seemed to crowd closer, their roots curling over the bank like claws. The surface was glassy, perfectly still, reflecting the sky with unnatural clarity. I threw a small stick into the middle, just to break the surface tension. The ripples spread outward, and then stopped halfway to the bank, as if the water itself refused to carry them further. Something about it unsettled me enough that I didn't linger. I cooked a can of chili over the wood stove and read until my flashlight started to dim. Around 10:30, the quiet deepened. I didn't notice it at first, but it was like the air grew heavier, denser. My breathing sounded loud in my own ears. Then came the first sound, a single knock. Not on the door, but from underneath the cabin. I froze, listening. A second knock. Then a third, each perfectly spaced. I told myself it had to be the foundation settling, or maybe a raccoon. But when I leaned down to press my ear to the floorboards, I swore I heard something else. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Directly beneath me. The next morning, I checked under the cabin. Just dirt, stone piers, and the lattice skirting. No footprints, no burrows. I decided to focus on work, mapping the property lines and measuring the cabin's footprint. Around mid-morning, I noticed something odd. Every bird in the area fell silent at exactly the same moment. My watch read 10:37 a.m. The hush lasted for over a minute before a single crow called in the distance, and then the forest resumed as if nothing had happened. It repeated the next day, and the next, always at 10:37. On the fourth morning, I opened the door to find a muskrat lying dead on the welcome mat. No wounds, no blood, just limp, as though it had fallen asleep and never woken up. Its eyes were still open, clouded over. Something about the way it was placed, dead center on the mat, body perfectly aligned, felt intentional. I buried it a few yards into the woods, but the sensation of being watched followed me back to the cabin. That evening, I went to the pond again. The sun was low, staining the sky a sickly orange. I stood at the edge, watching my reflection ripple slightly in the breeze. Then from across the water, a voice called my name. Not loudly, just enough to carry over the pond. Daniel. It was my mother's voice. She'd been dead for nearly 6 years. I stumbled backward, scanning the far bank. No one was there. The voice came again, softer, almost coaxing. Come down here. I want to show you something. I turned and walked back to the cabin without looking over my shoulder. That night, just before midnight, I saw it for the first time. I'd been sitting by the stove, trying to ignore the knocks under the floor, when something shifted in my peripheral vision. Out the window, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure. Tall, easily over 7 feet. Shoulders narrow, limbs too long. The skin was pale and stretched thin, as though it had been wrapped over a frame that didn't quite match the shape of a human skeleton. It didn't move. It didn't even seem to breathe. And though the window glass should have caught the reflection of my lamplight, its eyes were just black pits. The next day, I started going through my aunt's old books. Most were regional histories, but one caught my attention, a tattered leather-bound volume with no title. Inside were handwritten notes about Deadwater Hollow, stories dating back to before the first settlers. One entry described a watcher in the water that could take the likeness of anyone you knew, but only if you'd heard their voice before. Another page warned, if it calls your name from the pond, do not answer. If it comes to your door, do not open it. If it stands at the trees, you have already been marked. I thought I could wait it out. Finish the survey, lock up, leave in the morning. That plan lasted until the sun went down. First came the knock under the floor, 3 beats, slow and deliberate. Then the scrape along the siding, circling the cabin. When it stopped, I heard my father's voice outside the door. Danny, it's cold out here. Let me in. He's been in a nursing home in Charleston for the last decade. He can't even walk on his own anymore. I stayed quiet, clutching my surveying hatchet. The voice changed, to my sister's, then to a co-worker's, then to my own voice, each one perfect but hollow, like an empty recording. Finally, it said something new, in a voice I didn't recognize. It's warmer under the water. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark until the sky began to pale, then grabbed my bag and left everything else behind. I didn't even bother locking the door. I didn't take the road out. I cut across the ridge, followed the creek downstream until I hit a logging road, and walked until I found a gas station. When the cashier asked where I'd come from, I just said, the wrong side of the mountain. I haven't been back. I filed the deed transfer, but the cabin sits empty. I pay the property taxes without complaint. Sometimes, when I'm out surveying near a stream or pond, I'll catch my reflection and swear it smiles just a fraction before I do. And twice in the past month, I've woken in the middle of the night to the sound of 3 slow knocks. But my apartment's on the 2nd floor, and there's nothing under me but air. My name's Adrian Cole. I'm 33, and until last year I thought the strangest part of my family's history was that my father once got arrested for stealing an entire vending machine. Turns out, that was just the warm-up act. It started 3 months after my older sister, Sarah, died from a brain aneurysm. It was quick. 1 minute she was scrolling her phone on the couch, the next she was gone. That left me as the only family for her son, Eli, who had just turned 15. I'd been living in Lexington, Kentucky, working seasonal construction jobs and bouncing between rentals. I wasn't exactly the guardian type, but child services made it clear. It was me or foster care. The idea of him landing in the system made my stomach turn. So I said yes, packed up what little I had, and decided to move into an old property that had been sitting in my mother's name for decades. a hunting cabin on the backside of Blackstone Hill in the Cumberland Plateau. I'd only been there once as a kid, and my main memory was that it felt like the trees leaned in just a little too much. I told myself this would be a reset, a cheap place to live while I figured out how to be responsible. Somewhere quiet for Eli to grieve without constant reminders of school hallways and sympathy stares. I was wrong. Getting to the cabin meant turning off the county highway onto a dirt road that had more ruts than flat ground. The last stretch wound through dense oak and pine. The branches knotted overhead so tightly the sunlight came through in thin, shifting strips. The cabin itself was a squat rectangle of weathered pine boards set on cinderblock pillars. A stone chimney clung to one side like it might fall off at any second. Out front was a porch with a sagging swing and a welcome mat that had been bleached almost white by the sun. Inside it was bare bones, 2 narrow beds, a table, a wood stove, and a rusted hand pump in the kitchen. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet nails left in a bucket too long. Eli didn't say much, but that wasn't new. Since Sarah died, his words came out rationed, like every sentence had to be worth the effort. That first night, we ate instant noodles and played gin rummy until the lantern dimmed. I thought maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be so bad. The second night, I woke up to a sound on the wall. 3 knocks. Slow. Spaced out. At first I thought it was a branch hitting the siding, but the timing was too clean. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. I sat up and glanced at Eli. He was lying on his back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. "You hear that?" I asked. He nodded once. "She's here." The way he said it, flat, certain, made my skin prickle. "Who?" Eli didn't look at me. "The woman under the hill." When I was a kid, I remembered hearing older folks talk about Blackstone Hill in the same tone you'd talk about a condemned house. The story shifted depending on who was telling it, but the gist was this. Before the Civil War, a woman named Mabel Greer lived in a cabin on the hill. She was accused of witchcraft after several children went missing. The search party never found her, but they claimed to hear crying under the ground near her property. The story goes that she dug a burrow under the hill to hide in, and she's still there, waiting. I always thought it was just another fireside scare tactic. That night, I wasn't so sure. On the 4th morning, I opened the front door to find a crow lying on the welcome mat. No blood, no sign of a fight, just perfectly intact, eyes cloudy, feet curled in. Its wings were tucked so neatly it looked posed. I buried it in the trees. The whole time, I had the creeping sensation that someone was just behind me, leaning close enough to breathe on my neck. When I turned, nothing moved except a single oak leaf spiraling to the ground. That evening, Eli stayed quiet through dinner, then wandered out to the porch while I washed dishes. 10 minutes later, I heard him say something low. When I stepped outside, he was staring toward the treeline. "What are you doing?" I asked. He turned, pale in the lantern glow. "She said my name. She wants to show me something." The hair on my arms rose. "Who?" He pointed toward the dark slope of Blackstone Hill. The 6th night, the knocking didn't come from the wall. It came from under the floor. 3 slow thumps, then a dragging scrape, like someone pulling their nails through packed dirt. I grabbed the flashlight and dropped to my knees, pressing my ear to the boards. The scraping grew louder. Then I heard it, a voice hoarse and wet, whispering my full name. Not Adrian. Not hey. The full 3 syllables, drawn out exactly the way my mother used to say it when she was angry. The next morning, Eli had a thin cut running from his ankle to mid-calf. Not jagged, clean, like it had been made with a single sharp edge. "What happened?" I asked. "She touched me," he said, looking at the floor. I asked if he meant an animal, but he just shook his head. "She's under us." On the 9th day, I woke to silence. Eli's bed was empty. His hoodie was folded neatly on the porch rail. I ran through the trees until my throat burned, shouting his name. No footprints, no broken branches, just the endless forest swallowing my voice. When I stumbled back to the cabin, I went straight to the floorboards, ripped them up until my hands bled. Beneath was just dirt, cold, damp, smelling of stone. I leaned close and heard something below. Crying. Faint at first, then clearer. Eli's voice. I dug until the hole was shoulder deep, the walls pressing in on me, the air turning stale. But the crying stayed the same distance away, like it was retreating as I dug. By nightfall, I knew I couldn't stay. I found an old can of kerosene in the shed, poured it over every wall, every beam, the floor of the loft. When I lit the match, the flames took quickly, old pine and dry air conspiring to burn the place to ash. I stayed until the roof caved in, until sparks swirled up into the black like a reverse snowfall. 2 days later, they found me walking barefoot along County Route 14. My palms were split open, my nails broken down to the quick. They never found Eli. They never even found the cabin. Just a scorched patch of dirt where it should have been, as if it had been erased instead of burned. I moved to Ohio, changed my number, stopped using my real first name. Sometimes late at night, I'll wake to the sound of 3 slow knocks. And once, just once, I swear I heard a voice under the floor of my apartment, whispering up through the concrete. You're standing on my roof. I'm not from these mountains. I was born in Jacksonville, raised on the coast, the sort of place where the only forest was a row of palm trees beside the highway. When my wife, Natalie, left last spring, I quit my IT job, sold the condo, and took the first short-term gig I could find. Maintenance work for a small cabin rental company up in northern Georgia, near the Chattahoochee National Forest. The job was mindless, but it kept my hands busy and my mind quiet. My days were spent changing air filters, unclogging drains, tightening door hinges. The quiet suited me. Out here, no one asked about divorce lawyers or moving on. It was in late October, when the air smelled of wet leaves and chimney smoke, that I got an odd work order. A couple had rented one of our high-end properties deep in an area locals called Lost Fox Hollow. They left after just one night. The note they left in the drop box was vague, scratching inside the walls, whispering at night, no cell signal. That didn't surprise me. City people don't realize how the woods sound at night. The creak of a settling porch, squirrels in the attic, throw in a coyote howl, and they're ready to sleep in their SUV. Still, the manager sent me to check the place. The road to Lost Fox Hollow wound through tight switchbacks and dark pines. The sun was still above the ridge when I turned off onto the gravel drive, but the shadows were long enough that the headlights came on automatically. Halfway up, I saw someone standing on the porch. He wore a faded hunting jacket, mud-streaked jeans, and work boots the color of rust. His posture was wrong, not relaxed like someone waiting, but rigid, as if he'd been standing there for hours and had forgotten why. I slowed the truck, leaned out the window. "Afternoon," I called. "You here for the weekend?" He didn't answer. I parked, grabbed my tool bag, and walked up to the porch. The boards were damp, smelling faintly of pine sap. "This cabin's supposed to be empty," I said. The man turned his head toward me, and the movement was unnervingly slow. Then came a smile. Not a friendly one, not even an unfriendly one, just off. His lips pulled back farther than they should, revealing teeth of mismatched shapes, as though they'd been collected rather than grown. And his eyes, there was no brown, no blue, not even the cloudy haze of cataracts. Just pure black, like the inside of a cave. He said my name. Not sir, not hey, not you. My actual name, Elliot. I hadn't told him. I froze, the sound of my name pulling at an old wound. When I was 10, my older cousin Matthew vanished. We'd been fishing near a place called Devil's Run, and he'd gone upriver to check a snag. They found his rod and his boots, but never him. For years, I had dreams where he'd walk into my room, dripping wet, eyes wide as though he'd just surfaced from a long dive. The man on the porch tilted his head the way dogs do when they hear a strange noise. "I wore Matthew's face once," he said, in a voice that was neither deep nor high, but brittle, like a branch bending before it snaps. It wasn't a confession. It was a statement of possession. "I'll wear yours next," he added. Something in me shifted then, a deep animal impulse. I dropped the tool bag, bolted for the truck, and slammed the door so hard the mirror rattled. I didn't even reverse. I just tore down the drive, gravel pinging off the undercarriage. I didn't check the rear view until I hit the main road. No one was behind me. I told myself it was just some squatter, maybe high, maybe messing with me. But that night, as I sat in my small rental eating cold chicken from the fridge, I thought I saw movement outside, just a flicker at the edge of the window. At 2:13 a.m., I woke to a sound. 3 soft knocks. Not on the front door, the back one, the one that opened onto the tree line. I checked. No one there. No tracks in the damp dirt. It happened again the next night. Same time. Same number of knocks. I set up a motion light. Nothing triggered it. By the 4th night, I stopped checking. 1 week later, I heard my name outside my bedroom window. Elliot, I'm cold. Let me in. It didn't sound human. The syllables were too sharp, the pauses unnatural, as if the voice was imitating human speech from memory alone. I sat frozen in bed, staring at the window. The blinds were down, but I could feel someone or something on the other side. The next day, I made the mistake of asking about it at Walker's General Store. Most folks just gave me the same polite, tight-lipped smile they reserve for outsiders. An old woman stacking milk crates told me to leave a saucer of milk by the window each night for the travelers. Another woman said to burn cedar branches, but an old man named Albert took my hand before I left. His grip was like dry rope. "You didn't see a ghost," he said quietly. "You saw a borrower." I'd never heard the word used like that. He explained, "They're older than the hills, older than the rivers. They don't haunt, they replace. Wear your life like a coat. You see one, it knows you, and it waits." That night, I dreamed of Matthew again. Only this time, his face wasn't his. It was stretched too tight, the mouth too wide, the teeth too many. When he spoke, his voice was mine. I woke to the knock at 2:13. This time, it was followed by the scrape of fingernails or claws down the doorframe. I didn't sleep after that. Against my better judgment, I went back to the cabin 2 days later. My boss said a new couple was checking in next weekend, and I had to make sure the place was ready. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The porch was empty. The air was sharp with the smell of wood smoke from some unseen chimney. Inside, the cabin was spotless. No dust, no cobwebs. Too clean. I walked through each room, checking the sinks, the heating, the lights. In the upstairs bedroom, I noticed something odd. On the inside of the closet door, someone had scratched a pattern of triangles and circles into the wood. When I bent closer, I realized it was carved from the inside out. I left without finishing the inspection. I quit the job a month later and moved into a small apartment in Dahlonega. I keep the blinds drawn and the doors locked, but sometimes walking downtown, I see people whose faces seem almost right. The cashier at the grocery store who never blinks. The mailman whose smile is identical every single morning. The neighbor whose voice seems to change pitch between hello and goodbye. And some nights, at exactly 2:13 a.m., I wake to a sound I can't explain. 3 knocks. Soft. Patient. My name's Marcus Bell. I'm 42 and work nights as a paramedic in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. I've seen some messed up things on the job. Wrecks, overdoses, even a barn fire where we found the owner still clutching the garden hose. But what happened last fall, on my own time, makes all of that seem almost normal. I don't talk about it much. If someone catches me at a bar after a long shift and buys me a drink or two, it might slip out in pieces. But even then, I can see the look people get when they think you've crossed the line from been through something to needs help. The weekend it happened, I'd taken 3 days off in a row, rare for me. My plan was simple. Drive up to my grandfather's old fishing shack near Miller's Vein, a stretch of forested hills on the Virginia-West Virginia line. The shack had been sitting empty since he died. My mom wanted to sell it, but I couldn't let it go. It was one of the last places I remembered him laughing, telling tall tales while he cleaned trout on the porch. I figured I'd use the time to sweep out the cobwebs, check the roof, maybe fix the porch railing before winter set in. The drive out took me through stretches of road, so quiet I could hear the hum of my tires over my own breathing. I got there just before sunset. The place looked the same, leaning chimney, green tin roof, and the old hand-carved sign that read Bell Shack, even though no one named Bell had stayed there in years. That first evening was exactly what I'd been hoping for. I grilled some venison steaks I'd brought in a cooler, sat out on the porch with a beer, and listened to the cicadas fading into the night. The moon was just high enough to turn the treeline silver. I walked the edge of the property, found the half-buried anchor stone my grandfather used as a makeshift bench, and even located the tiny wooden platform we'd nailed into an oak for deer spotting when I was a kid. It was the kind of slow, quiet night that makes you think you could live without electricity if you had to. Then, around midnight, the quiet broke. It came from down the slope, somewhere near where the woods got thick and the ground dipped toward the old mine road. A sound like a wet, dragging cough, low, chest deep, almost like phlegm rattling in someone's lungs. At first, I thought it might be a sick fox or an old coyote. I even called out, just to see if a neighbor's dog had wandered too far. That's when it made another sound, something that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so wrong. Like someone who had heard laughter before but couldn't quite remember how to do it. It stuttered in the middle, went flat at the end, and carried too much spit. The hair on my arms lifted. I went inside, locked the door, and pulled the curtain just enough to look out toward the treeline. It was standing between two sycamores, just far enough back that the shadows clung to it. 7 feet, maybe more. Thin in the way that makes you think something's missing under the skin. Its arms were too long for its frame, hanging in a slow sway. The hands, if they were hands, ended in fingers that seemed to bend in too many places. It didn't move, didn't even tilt its head, just faced the shack. My chest felt hollow, like my heart had stepped back into my spine. I backed away from the window without breaking eye contact, grabbed the big mag light from the kitchen, and pulled my grandfather's old splitting axe from behind the wood stove. Not because I thought I could take it down, more because doing nothing felt worse. I flicked on the porch light and eased the door open. The yard was empty. I stepped down to the gravel path, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. My beam caught something in the dirt right at the edge of the yard, a footprint. Long bare, toes stretched out like a hand reaching for something. Human in shape, but wrong in proportion. Like someone had carved the idea of a foot without ever having seen one. It was angled toward the shack. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in a kitchen chair with my back against the wall, the axe across my lap, and the flashlight propped so the beam pointed at the front door. The next morning, I decided to leave, but I didn't start the truck right away. Instead, I slung my backpack on and hiked toward the ridge trail that runs behind the shack. It follows an old wagon path from the coal days, winding past a mine entrance that had been sealed since before I was born. When I was a kid, my grandfather called it Miller's Vein, said it had the purest seam of coal in the county until the collapse in '38 buried 6 men alive. They'd never dug them out. I figured if I saw something real, something human-made and solid, it might ground me after the night before. The trail was overgrown but still passable. When I reached the mine, I stopped short. The boards sealing the entrance, heavy oak planks bolted into the rock, were gone. Not broken, not pried apart. Gone. They were stacked neatly to one side, like someone had removed them with care. I edged closer, peering into the black mouth of the shaft. Cold air breathed out from it, smelling of wet stone and rusted metal. That's when I heard it. Not an echo, too steady for that. Breathing. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from somewhere deep inside. I took one step back. The breathing stopped. Then, from the dark, Marcus. I don't remember deciding to run. My legs just took over. I tore down that trail so fast I caught a root and slammed shoulder first into a tree trunk. I didn't stop. Not until the shack came into view. I jumped in the truck, hands shaking so bad I missed the ignition the first time, then slammed the gas until I hit the main road. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't want to know if anything had followed. 3 days later, after convincing myself I'd imagined most of it, I called the county forestry office. Told them I'd spotted structural instability at the Miller's Vein entrance. I gave them just enough detail to get them to send someone out and reseal it, without asking too many questions. I haven't been back since. I keep paying the taxes on the shack, but I don't even look at it on Google Earth. A month later, an old EMT I used to ride with asked me why I looked like hell. I half joked about seeing something strange up at the shack. He went quiet, then said, "You don't mess around Miller's vein. Folks around there say the collapse didn't kill those miners. The mountain kept them. They're still down there, working in the dark. Skin turned pale, bones stretched thin, and they'll take any voice they can get if it helps bring someone else in." I laughed it off, but he didn't laugh with me. Sometimes on my night shifts, I hear breathing in the back of the ambulance after I've cleaned it out. I'll turn, and there's nothing. And once, just once, I heard my name low and wet, like someone coughing it up from the bottom of their lungs. I tell myself it's nothing, that I'm tired, that ghosts aren't real. But I also keep my grandfather's axe in the cab of my truck now, wherever I go, just in case the mountain ever comes calling again. My name's Caleb Morgan. I'm 38 years old, and until last fall, the most dangerous thing I'd done was change a transmission in my uncle's garage without using a jack stand. I've never been the weekend warrior type, hiking, camping, connecting with nature. None of that ever interested me. My idea of the outdoors was a lawn chair, a fishing rod, and a cooler. But last October, something in me shifted. It wasn't a sudden midlife crisis. It was quieter than that, more like an itch under my skin that wouldn't go away. I'd been working 6 days a week at the feed store in Jasper County, barely sleeping, chain-drinking gas station coffee, and fighting off the kind of restlessness you can't pin to any one thing. My doctor said I needed time away from noise. Noise, I thought, wasn't just sound. It was people, the same roads, the same creaking floors in my old rental house. I needed somewhere I couldn't be reached. A friend at the store mentioned a backcountry stretch out in the Unaka Mountains, near the North Carolina-Tennessee border. It wasn't on any tourist pamphlet. The locals called it Black Hollow. No official trails, just a scattering of old logging paths and a creek that disappears underground for miles before resurfacing downstream. "It's the kind of place where you can hear yourself think," he said. That was exactly what I wanted. I left before sunrise with a paper map, a thermos of coffee, and the vague intention of finding a spot by the creek to sit for a few hours. I parked my truck near a rusted cattle gate, the closest thing to a trailhead I could find. The map I had was 20 years out of date, hand-drawn, with someone's faded pencil notes in the margins. The first mile was easy enough, crunch of dry leaves under my boots, the sharp smell of pine sap, the low groan of branches shifting overhead. By the second mile, the trees closed in tall and tight, their tops blotting out the morning sun. The air in Black Hollow had weight to it, not the damp heaviness you get before a storm. This was different, like breathing inside a sealed room that had been locked for decades. I passed an old signpost half swallowed by moss. The lettering was worn smooth, but someone had nailed a bent horseshoe to it. Superstition, I guessed. Folks in these parts nailed iron to trees to keep the voices quiet. I didn't know what that meant at the time. About 3 miles in, the ground started sloping downward, and the trail unraveled. The soil gave way to tangled roots, patches of stone, and bramble thick enough to snag my sleeves. I was already considering turning back when the brush opened unexpectedly into a clearing. It wasn't a natural break in the trees. The edges were too sharp, too deliberate, like a perfect circle cut out of the forest. In the center stood a pine tree unlike any I'd ever seen. Black bark twisted in spirals, its branches bare except for a few brown needles clinging like dying embers. Around its base, the soil was scorched. I stepped closer, scanning the ground for animal tracks, maybe signs of a lightning strike. That's when I saw it, caught on a low branch, fluttering slightly in the wind. A strip of checkered fabric, blue and white, frayed at the edges. It hit me harder than I expected. My younger brother Aaron had been wearing a shirt just like that the day he vanished 12 years ago. Disappeared from a gas station parking lot in Marion. They never found him. I reached for the cloth, and my ears popped hard. Not like a quick change in altitude, but a deep, dragging pressure that seemed to pull my stomach with it. And then I heard it. It was faint at first, almost a trick of the wind, Caleb. Not shouted, not whispered, just placed in the air, like someone speaking inches from the back of my neck. I spun around, scanning the treeline. There, half hidden behind a curtain of branches, stood a figure. Tall enough to hunch under the canopy, its arms hanging low like wet rope. The skin, if you could call it that, was stretched too thin over bone, pale with a sheen like frost. The head was wrong, too long in the jaw, mouth fixed in a grin that was both too smooth and too full of teeth. And in that grin I recognized something. Not the face, exactly, more like the suggestion of one. Aaron's eyes, or at least the way I remembered them. It spoke again, this time with a wet rasp that made my teeth ache. Come see where he went. I don't remember deciding to run. My body moved before my brain caught up. I tore through the brush, twigs snapping against my face, boots catching on roots. The voice followed, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, never shouting, never hurried. The forest seemed to shift while I ran. Paths doubled back where they shouldn't. Landmarks I'd passed earlier, like the moss-covered boulder near the creek, were suddenly nowhere to be found. At one point, I burst into another clearing, smaller than the first. There was something arranged in the dirt, a circle of stones, each marked with a deep groove down the center. In the middle lay a pile of small animal skulls. Some still had bits of fur clinging to them. That was when the smell hit, sweet, cloying rot, like meat left in the sun. I stumbled back into the trees, my breath tearing at my throat, and didn't stop until I saw an old fence post with rusted barbed wire coiled at its base. I recognized it from the drive-in. I followed the wire until it led me back to the cattle gate. I sat in my truck for what felt like an hour, staring at the tree line, expecting that long, thin figure to step out at any second. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? That something wearing my missing brother's eyes had spoken to me in the woods? That it knew my name? For weeks after, I heard the voice at night, not in dreams, but while lying awake. It never said much, just fragments. Still here. Not far. Sometimes just my name. I stopped sleeping altogether for a while. Then, in mid-November, I saw a post on the Jasper County bulletin board. Another man had gone missing in Black Hollow. A hiker from Asheville. The description said he'd last been seen wearing a blue and white checkered shirt. Against every shred of common sense I had, I went back. Not far, just to the edge of where the trees closed in. I needed to know if the clearing was real, if the pine was still there. But when I reached the spot where it should have been, there was nothing. No circle, no scorched ground, just dense, unbroken forest. And yet, there was the smell again. Sweet, rotting. A month later, I finally mentioned it to one of the old-timers at the store, a man named Otis who'd lived in Jasper County his whole life. Black Hollow pine? He asked, his face going still. He told me the land used to be Choctaw hunting ground, but long before settlers came, the hollow was considered cursed. Hunters would go in and not come out. Those who did were said to come back half-claimed, speaking in voices that weren't their own. The pine, he said, wasn't a pine at all. It's where the ground breathes, he whispered. It remembers faces, gives them back to you so you'll follow. I don't hike anymore. I don't even walk near tree lines. But the voice, it's quieter now. Weeks go by without hearing it. Still, every now and then, when the wind catches just right, I swear I hear Aaron calling from far away. Come see. And I wonder, not if I'll go back, but how long it'll be before the hollow comes looking for me instead. My name's Thomas Klein. I'm 42, a former EMT turned freelance photographer, and for the last 3 years, I've been traveling through the less touristy parts of the southern Appalachians, shooting small-town life for regional magazines. I never thought of myself as superstitious. I'd worked trauma calls, seen more than my share of genuine tragedy, so ghost stories never did much for me. But there's something that happened last fall, October, just before the leaves hit their peak. That's been following me in a way no call, no scene, no accident ever has. It happened in northern Georgia, near a nowhere place called Harrow Creek. I'd been camped out in Harrow Creek for a few days to photograph an old covered bridge. The morning I'm talking about was supposed to be my first true day off in weeks. No deadlines, no gear in the car, no alarms. Just coffee and maybe a nap. But the air was perfect that morning, the kind of sharp, early autumn chill that seems to carry the scent of wood smoke from miles away. It was the sort of day that dares you to waste it. I asked around at the gas station for a trail that wasn't swarming with tourists. The clerk, a man in his late 60s with a lazy eye, suggested Briar Hollow. "Ain't on the park map," he said. "Starts down an old service road. Most folks don't bother." That sounded exactly right. The entrance wasn't marked except for a sun-bleached metal post half buried in weeds. A weathered plank leaned against a birch with faded stenciling. And no trespassing. Forestry use only. I ducked under anyway. The first mile was gorgeous, maples bleeding red, the forest floor dappled gold, air damp with the smell of moss and rotting leaves. The wind through the canopy had a low, steady tone, like someone breathing slow and deep. 2 miles in, I rounded a bend and saw her. She was just standing there in the middle of the path, facing me. Her jeans were caked with mud from the knees down. The knees themselves split open like she'd fallen hard more than once. Her jacket hung loose, sleeves pushed up unevenly. What stopped me was her skin, pale, not sickly exactly, but with that chilled, bluish undertone you only see on people who've been outside too long. She looked up at me like she'd been waiting. "Please," she said, barely above a whisper. "Walk me down. I can't find the way." Something about her tone overrode every instinct I had to ask questions. I nodded and stepped forward. She reached out, gripping my forearm. Her hand was cold, unnaturally so. Not just from the weather. The pressure felt wrong too, the way her fingers curled stiffly, as if her joints didn't fully work. We started downhill. I tried small talk. Was she hurt? Did she have a phone? But she didn't answer. Her gaze stayed locked on the trail, lips moving soundlessly. I leaned closer and caught it. "Lay the marrow in the ground. It won't come sniffing back around." Over and over, same pitch, same rhythm. It didn't sound like something she'd made up. It had the cadence of something passed down, like a nursery rhyme that had gone sour. After a while, the forest seemed to lean in. The breeze died. The sound of birds gone. Even our footfalls felt muffled, like the trail was swallowing them. That's when I started seeing things just off the path. A pair of eyeglasses, one lens cracked, sitting neatly on a stump. A child's rubber boot, half filled with stagnant water. A length of braided rope tied into a loop, swaying though there was no wind. Each time I slowed to look, she tightened her grip, still chanting. Eventually, the trees thinned, and we emerged into a clearing near the base of the ridge. She stumbled forward, dropping to her knees like someone who'd been holding her breath for too long. "It stopped," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I crouched to ask what she meant, but her eyes stayed fixed on the trail behind us, scanning the dark line of trees. The nearest ranger station was a single-room shack with a desk, a dented metal filing cabinet, and a corkboard cluttered with faded trail maps and curling missing person flyers. I made her coffee from the dusty tin on the shelf. She held the cup with both hands, not drinking, just letting the steam roll over her face. After a while, she spoke without looking at me. It sang to me before I saw it. At first, she thought it was just another hiker humming somewhere ahead. A slow, almost tuneless hum, like a child killing time. But it didn't fade. It moved with her. It was everywhere, she said, like the trees were singing. Then words slipped in. Up the ridge and down the bend. Follow till your journey ends. Stack the bones and bind them tight. You'll be home by dead of night. She tried to run downhill, but kept ending up in the same place. A deadfall with a mossy log and an oak carved with 3 sets of initials. Every loop, the singing got louder. The voice started laughing, a jagged, choking laugh, like someone trying to force mirth through a mouth not built for it. She was almost ready to give up when she heard my footsteps and broke toward me. Then she said something that stuck in my chest. "You saved me, but you heard it too now." When she left, I asked the ranger, an older man with a limp, if he knew anything about Briar Hollow. He was quiet a long time before saying, "Some hollows keep what they catch. The smart ones don't walk him twice." Before she left the station, the woman touched my sleeve. "I've seen someone like you before," she said. "Same trail, same look in the eyes. I helped him too. What happened to him?" I asked. She shook her head. "The trail found him again. I've tried not to think about it, but sometimes, usually late, when the wind dies and the house is still, I hear it. Not loudly, just a low hum, like someone pacing outside, waiting for me to open the door. Last week, I woke at 3:17 a.m. and found a length of braided rope hanging from the oak in my backyard. I don't hike alone anymore, but I've started dreaming about Briar Hollow. Dreams where the trees lean closer, and the path behind me is gone, and from somewhere just out of sight, a voice starts to sing. I wasn't supposed to be in West Virginia that October, at least not for work. I'm 38, a cartographer, meaning I make maps for a living. It's not as romantic as it sounds. Most of it is digitizing old survey data into clean, clickable layers for government clients. But every once in a while, I get a project that involves actual field work. This one was supposed to be simple. Mark some outdated trails in the Rooks Hollow section of the Allegheny Highlands and confirm which ones were still passable for hikers. I could have stayed in town, driven in each morning. Instead, I decided to rent a cabin close to the work site. Call it stubbornness or wishful thinking. After months of fluorescent office lighting and deadlines stacked like firewood, I wanted space, quiet, and stars. The listing I found wasn't much to look at online. Just 2 grainy photos, a small cedar-sided cabin with a sloped tin roof, and a porch sagging just enough to give it character. The price was suspiciously low, but it sat less than a mile from one of my target trails. Sold. If you've never been there, Rooks Hollow is the kind of place where the forest grows thick right up to the road, where one-lane bridges are still made of wood, and the gas station sells both chainsaw oil and deer feed at the same counter. By the time I left the main highway, my phone signal was gone. The last town I passed through was Miller's Crossing, a handful of clapboard houses, a church with a leaning steeple, and a diner advertising fried bologna sandwiches on a hand-painted sign. Past that, the road narrowed to a series of blind curves bordered by sycamores whose branches arched overhead like ribs. The air had that late autumn bite to it, damp and earthy, tinged with wood smoke. When I pulled up to the cabin, the sun was low enough to wash everything in copper light. The air was so still it felt staged, like the woods were holding a breath. Inside, the place smelled faintly of cedar and dust. A single room with a small kitchen, a potbelly stove, and a loft bed above. It was cleaner than I'd expected, but there was something about the way the corners seemed to hold on to shadow that made me switch on more lamps than I needed. The first night was uneventful. I heated a can of soup, sketched a few updates to the trail map by lantern light, and sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. Out here, the stars were fierce, so many, and so sharp, they almost seemed too close. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of something moving beyond the porch rail. Not footsteps exactly, more like fabric dragging lightly over damp ground. I sat still, eyes adjusting, scanning the tree line. Nothing, just darkness between the boles of the pines. The next morning, I set out to survey a trail marked on my old 1984 forestry map as Fletcher's Way. It wasn't on any modern maps, which usually meant it had been abandoned or rerouted. Still, the cabin's proximity made it the logical starting point. At first, it was easy enough to follow, a faint path through leaf litter, flanked by mountain laurel and rhododendron. The air was damp and smelled of wet stone. Every so often, I'd hear a faint creak like a branch under tension, only to look up and see the canopy perfectly still. 2 miles in, the ground began to rise. The trail narrowed until it was little more than a deer track, curling around a mossy slope. And then I saw her. She stood maybe 20 feet ahead, half turned toward me. Her coat hung past her knees, the fabric so caked with mud it was hard to tell its original color. Her hair was matted, hanging in ropes that clung to her jaw and neck. In one hand, she held a small lantern, an old, oil-burning kind, its glass fogged with soot. "Do you know the way down?" she asked. Her voice was low, almost steady, but there was something in it that caught, the way someone's tone changes when they've been walking alone too long. I told her I was heading back toward the cabin, and she nodded once. As I stepped closer, she reached out, her fingers curling around my wrist. Her hand was cold, not the kind of cold you get from weather, but a bone-deep chill that felt like it had no business in a living body. We walked in silence for a few minutes before I realized she was murmuring something under her breath. At the hollow's mouth lay the flame down low. Keep the eyes shut, don't let them know. It was so soft I wasn't sure at first if I'd heard it right. She repeated it, same rhythm, same words, like someone reciting instructions they were terrified of forgetting. Not far from where I'd met her, I began noticing odd things scattered just off the path. A single work boot, the leather gone green with mildew. A mason jar half buried in the soil, filled with what looked like river silt and a tangle of hair. A child's wind-up toy, its paint worn off, clicking faintly though there was no breeze. Each time my attention lingered, her grip on my wrist tightened. When we reached a place where the trail widened into a small clearing, she let go of me and sank to her knees. Her breath came in short, shallow pulls, as if she'd been holding it since we started. "It doesn't come past here," she whispered. Before I could ask what she meant, she stood and pointed me toward the slope that would lead us down. Back at the ranger station, a squat cinder block building with a single dusty window, she sat clutching a mug of coffee like it might shatter if she loosened her grip. When she finally spoke, it came out in fragments. It was behind me, not walking, more like gliding. Every time I turned, it wasn't there, but the light from my lantern. She broke off, shaking her head. The light got swallowed, like it hated it. Then she recited the words she'd been murmuring to herself, and I realized it wasn't just a chant, it was a ward. Later, I asked the ranger, a leathery man named Dale, if he knew anything about Fletcher's Way. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he poured himself more coffee and stared into it. "Old folks call her the Lantern Woman," he said finally. "Not a ghost, not a person, something older. She walks the trail after dark, looking for company. If she asks you to follow, you don't say no, and you don't look behind you. She'll keep you until she finds someone else to take your place." That night, I kept the lantern lit in the cabin, more for my nerves than anything else. Around 1 a.m., I woke to a faint glow outside, like someone walking with a light along the tree line. I stayed still, watching it drift closer, until it stopped at the edge of the clearing. It didn't fade out. It went black all at once, like someone had closed a door on it. I left at dawn. Didn't bother with breakfast, didn't check my notes. The drive out felt longer than it should have, every curve of the road watched by something I couldn't see. In the rear view, just before the highway, I caught sight of a pale figure in the tree-line. The coat, the lantern, the tilt of the head, and then the glass in the mirror cracked, a hairline fracture running right across her face. It's been nearly a year. I still work maps, still take jobs in the mountains, but I don't hike alone anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint click of a wind-up toy from somewhere outside. And once, only once, I woke to find a mason jar on my porch, half filled with silt and hair. I threw it into the river the next morning. But I swear, when I turned to walk away, there was the faintest sound behind me, like fabric dragging lightly over damp ground. I was 39 when I decided I'd had enough of my own company. 2 years after my divorce, my social life had been reduced to work dinners and polite grocery store nods, and the only real conversations I had were with the radio on my evening commute. I'm a freelance proofreader, quiet work for quiet people, and for the past year, my main client had been an outdoors travel magazine. My editor sent me article after article about Appalachian trails, small-town bed and breakfasts, and hidden gems in mountain hollows, and something about the descriptions stuck in me like a splinter. I'd never been a hiker, but the idea of being somewhere that wasn't humming with Wi-Fi signals started to sound almost medicinal. So when the fall calendar opened up, I booked a week in a remote cabin near Blackburn Gap in eastern Kentucky. My only real goal was to break my routine, walk during the day, cook something that didn't come from a microwave, sleep without the glow of my phone in the dark. The last town before Blackburn Gap was called Milford. It was the kind of place where the diner still had pie cooling on the windowsill. Not for charm, but because there was nowhere else to put it. The air smelled faintly of coal smoke and wood stoves, and the hills seemed to fold in closer the farther I drove. By the time I reached the Forest Service road, my GPS had gone blank. The pavement ended in a mess of gravel that rattled the wheel. Blackberry brambles leaned into the lane, and the trees formed a canopy that turned the late afternoon light into something green and underwater. When I finally saw the cabin, I almost kept driving, not because it looked dangerous, but because it looked too still. It was a small, cedar-clad thing on short stilts, with a wraparound porch sagging just slightly at one corner. No sound of insects, no wind. Even the leaves seemed to hang in place. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old pine and mineral dust. The furniture was simple: a narrow bed, a table with two mismatched chairs, and a wood stove with the kind of iron belly that looked like it could hold heat for days. I unpacked, made a quick dinner of soup and bread, and sat out on the porch until the last light slipped out of the hollow. At some point, I noticed a faint rhythm in the dark, 3 slow creaks, a pause, then 3 more. The porch boards beneath me weren't moving. The sound was coming from farther up the slope. The next morning, I decided to walk the trail that started at the edge of the clearing. It wound uphill for about 20 minutes before I reached something I hadn't expected: a weathered bathhouse. It didn't look abandoned, just misplaced. The clapboard siding was gray with age, the roof bowed, but a battered coin-operated washer and dryer sat humming inside, powered by a generator that coughed every few minutes. A note taped above the machines read, "For overnight visitors, ranger tokens only." I hadn't brought laundry, but the sight of it, functioning machines in the middle of the forest, was so odd I decided to sit for a bit. The interior smelled faintly of soap powder and rust. Sunlight came through a high window in dusty shafts, catching motes that swirled lazily in the air. I was leaning against the wall, jotting in my notebook, when the air changed. The hum of the dryer seemed to dim, and the fine hairs on my forearms lifted like static before a storm. When I looked up, there was someone standing in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket buttoned to the throat and trousers that didn't match. Too formal, too clean, as if they belonged to a different century. His boots were scuffed and dusted with something pale. His face wasn't blank exactly, but paused, as if he had been mid-thought, and the thought had been taken from him before he could finish it. We stared at each other for what could have been 3 seconds or 30. Then I nodded toward the humming machines. "Just me in here," I said, trying to keep my voice even. He didn't move, didn't blink, and then he wasn't there. No step back, no shift of shadow. Just gone. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the change in light had tricked my eyes, that I'd been too wrapped in my own thoughts. But later that afternoon, I returned to the bathhouse to fill my water bottle from the sink. When I turned from the tap, he was in the corner by the folding table. Same jacket, same stillness. This time I dropped the bottle. Water spread across the floor, creeping toward his boots. He didn't react, didn't so much as glance down. His eyes weren't focused on me, or on anything in the room. It was like looking into a photograph where the subject had been caught between frames. I blinked, and the corner was empty. That evening, I walked to the ranger station, a squat building with one window and a radio mast, and told the man at the desk what I'd seen. He didn't look surprised. "Dark coat?" he asked. "Yes." "Boots covered in pale dust?" I nodded. "That'd be Hollow Man," he said simply. "Been part of this place longer than I have. Folks say he's looking for something he lost up here. Laundry room's where he shows most. Maybe he thinks it'll turn up there." When I asked if anyone had ever spoken to him, the ranger shook his head. "You can try, but it won't matter. If he's here for you, he won't leave. Not till he's ready." Back at the cabin, I told myself it was just a story, something the locals passed around to keep the tourists entertained. But at 2:14 a.m., I woke to the sound of the porch creaking. 3 slow steps. A pause. 3 more. The boards outside my bedroom window groaned under weight that wasn't wind. I stayed frozen, every muscle locked, until the sound stopped. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, there was nothing on the porch but moonlight. The next morning I packed up. I didn't fold the blankets. I didn't wash the dishes. I just loaded the car and started down the gravel road toward Milford. Half a mile from the cabin, I glanced in the rear view. There he was, standing in the middle of the road, pale dust still clinging to his boots. The head tilted just slightly, not in curiosity, but in the way a person looks at something they've seen before and intend to see again. The mirror glass cracked across his face as I hit the curb. It's been 10 months. I've stayed in cities ever since. I use laundromats only when other people are around. But sometimes, when the machine in my basement finishes its cycle and the hum dies down, I feel the air shift, and I know there's someone in the room with me. I don't look right away, because if I see him again, I don't think I'll have the sense to leave. I was 36 when my sister finally convinced me to leave the city for a while. I'd been running my own architectural drafting business for almost a decade, which meant I spent 10 to 12 hours a day staring at blueprints on a glowing screen and falling asleep with a cramp in my mouse hand. I told her I didn't have time. She told me I didn't have a life. So when she offered me the use of her partner's family place in the mountains, a little old hunting cabin near Willows Vale, Tennessee, I gave in. She framed it like a health retreat. Fresh air, no deadlines. Maybe I'd even remember what my handwriting looked like. The drive-in felt like stepping backward in time. One moment I was on a two-lane highway behind an RV. The next I was winding through a narrow cut of road flanked by steep banks of black soil and bare oak roots. The GPS gave up halfway there. Cell signal blinked out soon after. The cabin was perched on a slope where the trees leaned in like they were conferring about you. Pine needles coated the roof, so thickly you could mistake it for part of the forest floor. Inside was what you'd expect. One main room with a potbelly stove, a narrow bedroom, a shelf full of faded field and stream magazines from the early 90s. But it was quiet. The kind of quiet that's heavy, like the world is holding its breath. I wasn't there more than 2 days before my sister's partner's friends started stopping by. They were younger than me, most barely out of high school, but they had that rural ease where they didn't apologize for showing up. Micah, tall and soft-spoken, fixed the porch step without being asked. Kayla brought over jars of pickled green beans. Even their little group's mischief maker, Jake, was friendly enough once he saw I'd brought coffee beans from the city. And then there was Owen. He was maybe 18, but there was something stretched in his expression, like the part of him that should have been young had been pulled too thin. He always wore the same threadbare army jacket, sleeves fraying at the cuffs. The first time I met him, he was already sitting on the cabin's front steps when I came back from a walk. I hadn't heard him approach. "You're the one from Knoxville," he said, not asked. "That's me," I answered, half laughing. "You the welcoming committee?" He smiled, too small for his eyes. "Best hope you're not here when the veil comes down." I didn't know what to say to that. Owen started appearing more often after that. Not every day, but often enough that I noticed the pattern. Late afternoons, always just after the mist began to thread low between the trees. Sometimes he'd bring things, odd bundles left on the porch rail, feathers bound with copper wire, a small cloth bag filled with ash, a wooden disc with a spiral burned into one side. When I asked what they were, he said, "For your corners. The fog eater don't like marked places." I told him gently not to leave anything else. He just looked relieved and said, "Good. The less you believe, the less it sees you." One evening by the fire pit, while the others were drinking hard cider and passing around a guitar, Owen told me about the fog eater. "It's older than the name for it," he said. "Comes in with the thick mist in the hollows, don't tear at you, don't chase you, it waits. Eats the part of you that knows you're you. Leaves the rest walking." Micah chuckled, called it mountain boogeyman talk. But Owen didn't smile. "It doesn't need you to be scared," he said. "Just lost." The night everything shifted was during the town's harvest get-together. Micah's uncle had a big clearing near the ridge, where they lit a bonfire the size of a small house. Music, stew in cast-iron pots, kids running with sparklers. It was warm, noisy, safe. But walking back down the trail, our lanterns catching on damp leaves, the air changed. Mist had started to settle low, clinging to the hollows between roots. That's when Owen stepped out from behind a poplar tree. No flashlight, no shoes. "You should hurry," he said, falling into step beside me. Kayla finally snapped at him to go home. He just smiled and said, "It already knows you're here." That was the first night we heard it. Around 3 in the morning, something started scratching along the siding. Slow at first, like testing the grain of the wood, then faster. The sound moved, up the wall, across the porch, then heavy footsteps overhead. I lay still listening. Then came the drag of something across the roof, long and deliberate. The next night, it was under the floor. The night after, I swear I heard breathing, close enough to fog the glass if I'd dared to look. On the 4th day, I found Owen's satchel behind the firewood stack. Inside were 6 teeth, for clearly animal, 2 less certain, a coil of wet black thread, a square of cloth with a spiral burned into it, matching the wooden disc he'd given me. I didn't tell anyone. I just moved the satchel far into the woods and left it there. After that, the warmth from the locals evaporated. Micah stopped answering when I called. Kayla turned away in the diner. Even the gas station clerk avoided my eyes. Only Marin, a girl who'd once come fishing with us, finally spoke. "Owen hasn't been home. He's been out in the fog. Says he hears it now. Says he understands it." We didn't wait to see what happened next. Packed at sundown, threw everything into the truck, drove until the forest gave way to farmland. We didn't play music, didn't talk, just listened to the wind in the bed of the truck and the gravel under the tires. For a while, we thought we'd left it behind. We moved to a rental 3 counties over, changed our numbers, told friends not to post photos. Then one morning, I found a small bundle on the windowsill, 3 crow feathers bound with copper wire. We moved again. We live in a 2nd-floor apartment above a hardware store in a town so flat the fog rarely lingers. Curtains stay shut after sundown. But 2 nights ago, I woke to the smell of wet earth inside the room. In the dark corner by the closet, I could just make out the faintest spiral burned into the wood of the floor. I didn't look at it for long, because the less you believe, Owen once said, the less it sees you. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I'm 41 years old. When this happened, I was a high school history teacher from Richmond, Virginia. The kind of job that swallows you whole during the school year and leaves you ragged by summer. This was June, right after my 2nd divorce, and my apartment felt like a museum to all my mistakes. Stacks of ungraded essays I no longer had to grade, furniture too big for one person, and the empty indent on the couch cushion where someone else used to sit. The truth is, I didn't go to the mountains for adventure or healing. I went because I couldn't stand the sight of my own living room anymore. I booked a week-long stay at a small cabin near Cinder Peak, a stretch of the Blue Ridge you won't find on most tourist maps. The listing was almost comically bare bones. 1-room structure with stove, hand pump for water, unplugged experience. Meaning no electricity, no signal, no excuses to check your phone. The photos made it look lonely in the best possible way. Moss climbing the siding, deep forest in every direction, a porch that looked like it might collapse under the weight of a strong breeze. The man who rented it to me, a soft-spoken local named Eli, handed me the keys in the parking lot of a feed store and warned me about the mountain fog. "It moves quick," he said. "If it's rolling in by evening, best to stay inside. Folks get turned around real easy out there." I thought he meant the usual, bad weather, poor visibility. I didn't realize until later that he meant something else entirely. The first 2 days felt like stepping out of my own skin. No morning alarms, no red ink grading pen, no awkward grocery store run-ins with people who still knew my ex-wife. Just the forest, green and endless, layered in bird calls and the slow hush of wind moving through leaves. The cabin itself was more functional than comfortable. The floorboards dipped in places, the wood stove smoked if you fed it too fast, and the windows didn't quite latch. The air inside carried that cold, faintly metallic scent of long unlived-in spaces. I spent my days exploring the slope behind the cabin. There were deer trails, crumbling stone walls half swallowed by roots, and once, the charred foundation of what must have been a house. I stood there for a while, imagining someone else's life reduced to ash and rubble. It was quiet enough at night that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. That kind of quiet is rare in the city. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. On the third morning, I opened the cabin door and found something resting on the porch step. A tight bundle of twigs, each no thicker than a pencil, bound with rough brown twine. The ends of the sticks were neatly trimmed, the knots sharp and deliberate. It wasn't the kind of thing that screamed danger, more like something you'd see at a roadside craft fair, but it was odd enough to notice. I assumed it was local folk art. Maybe Eli left it there to welcome me, though I couldn't figure why he wouldn't mention it. I placed it on the porch railing and forgot about it. The next morning, there was another one. This time it hung from a branch overhanging the trail I'd been hiking. The twine was darker, stained in places, and the sticks were arranged in a slightly different pattern, almost like a narrow diamond. It swayed faintly in the breeze, and I had the uneasy sense that it was meant to be exactly where I would see it. The third one didn't let me brush it off. That night, I double-latched the cabin door and shoved a chair under the knob. I developed the habit after hearing coyotes near the tree line on my hikes. By morning, the windows were still shut tight, the chair unmoved. But when I stepped into the main room, there it was, another bundle, sitting square in the middle of the table. I can still remember the way my scalp prickled. It was impossible not to start making calculations in my head. Had I locked the door as securely as I thought? Had I sleepwalked? Was someone from town playing a joke? Whatever the explanation, it meant one thing: someone had been inside. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the wood made me jolt upright. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it, the faint, deliberate crunch of leaves outside. It moved slowly around the cabin, one full circle, then another, and then nothing. Not the usual night sounds of the forest. Not an animal scurrying away. Just a heavy, smothering stillness that made my ears ring. When dawn came, I found a bundle on my pillow. The twine was interlaced with something pale and wiry. I told myself it was horsehair, though I've never been that good at lying to myself. The next day I hiked down to Ransom's General, the only store in the valley with a payphone. The man behind the counter, thick hands, eyes the pale blue of old denim, looked up when I asked about the twig markers. "You're up at the Mayweather place, ain't you?" I nodded. He sighed, leaned his elbows on the counter. "You ain't the first to come asking. Folks rent that cabin. Sometimes they make it a few days, sometimes less. They leave quiet. Don't take their things, don't talk about it." I asked what the bundles meant. "Depends," he said. "Some say they're warnings. Some say they're invitations. Either way, you don't want to find the fourth one." I should have left right then. I told myself I'd pack up when I got back, but when I returned to the cabin, there was no fourth marker. That night, I drank 2 fingers of whiskey straight from the bottle and sat up with the oil lamp burning. The forest outside felt alert. Sometime past midnight, the lamp went out. No sputter, no draft, just darkness. And then they were there. Shapes, too tall and too narrow, standing just beyond the tree line. The moonlight caught their outlines, but the details wouldn't hold in my vision, like my eyes refused to make sense of them. Their movements were jerky, deliberate, as if every step cost them something. One approached the porch, stooping slightly to set something down. When it straightened, I saw the twine bundle in its hand. This one nodded with strands of hair and something brittle white that clicked faintly when it moved. I didn't breathe until they were gone. At sunrise, I threw everything into my car. No breakfast, no cleaning, no second glance. I drove until the mountains were only a smear in the rearview mirror. By the time I reached Richmond, I had decided on a story I could live with: stress, isolation, and overactive imagination. For weeks it worked. 2 nights ago, I came home from school to find something on my apartment doormat. A bundle of twigs, bound with rough brown twine. The knot sharp, precise, and underneath, in handwriting I recognized from old love notes, my ex-wife's. It was my name,